If you love liberty, declare your independence by signing the Shire Society Declaration at shiresociety.com.
Hearing on Bill 1540 relative to ranked choice voting, and Representative Reed, you're the timer on this.
I am indeed.
Welcome again this afternoon.
And thank you so much again for welcoming me, Madam Chair and honorable members of the committee. One day I will have a bill that you like, I promise. So, let me just get my thoughts. I've been running around all over the place today. So for the record, my name is Ellen Reed, and I still represent Rockingham 17 New Market Newfield. Just to begin, I'll talk a little bit about our current voting system, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. It's called first past the post. It's an antiquated system that comes from Old England, when really no one had thought of anything more sophisticated. The result of our current method is wasted votes. People are not allowed in our current system to truly vote their conscience if they see the two primary party candidates as they see one as much worse than the other one. So they have to be strategic about their voting because of this spoiler effect, often voting for candidates, believing that voting for candidates that they truly prefer is equivalent to throwing away their vote. So they get stuck in this lesser of two evils dilemma, sometimes aptly called the evil of two lessers. And what we end up with, and I think we've seen this a lot in recent years, is a voting system based on fear. Not voting for anyone or any belief that we believe is good, but against somebody or against something. And being forced to choose between the two largest party candidates, of which I am a member, I should say, has been one of, if not the main driving force behind the polarization of our politics that we've all been talking about in the last few years. As each side seeks to differentiate itself from the other side, we get into more black and white thinking, more glorification and demonization of the other people. And it's just really not good for policy making. So even though a third of voters in the state consider themselves independent, I think it's actually north of a third, independent candidates in the state, third-party candidates, candidates without a lot of funds, other disadvantaged candidates cannot run competitive races because of this spoiler effect. So even if everybody loves these candidates, they're often seen as a wasted vote. And people are afraid of throwing their vote away on a candidate they love because they fear this, demonized other candidate. If you have several candidates in a race further, you will very frequently end up with a low plurality winner, a winner that has certainly less than 50% of the votes in a race with several candidates, sometimes and frequently much less than 50% of the vote. And so this is why so many people, one of the big reasons I believe, so many people are apathetic about voting. They don't come out because they feel their votes just don't matter anymore. That if they vote for who they really want, it's throwing away their vote, and they're honestly quite sick of being forced to vote for people that they really don't believe in. And no election highlighted this more than the 2016 election, where, and all of our personal feelings aside about it, and I know we all have strong feelings, objectively, just based on the numbers, we had two of the most widely hated presidential candidates in living memory. And yet almost everyone who voted for one of those two people who they frequently said they didn't want, but they really, really didn't want that other person, whichever side you were on. And if that other person wins, I'm leaving the country. So I don't think that's the way our founders wanted us to experience democracy, right? I don't think that's the way our founders envisioned us having representation. And so there are several voting systems that deal with some or actually all of these issues. And of those alternative voting systems, ranked choice voting is by far the one, and is actually probably the only one that's used widely. 21 states use ranked choice voting in some form, either in city elections, local elections, the military, or a state political party. Maine recently passed it, pending an amendment to resolve language conflicts with the Maine Constitution. That had to do with the definition of plurality. It's used throughout the English-speaking world, including in every election in Australia, Ireland, New Zealand, North Ireland, and Scotland. And it is the voting method recommended by Robert's Rules of Order. And as such, it's very widely used by many corporations and organizations, including over 50 colleges and universities, and is used by the Motion Picture Academy when determining winners for the Academy Awards. So, actually, you might have your own opinions about the Academy Awards. So actually, in practice, it should be a very familiar concept because it closely resembles how traditionally this body elects Speaker of the House. Not in this last election, but I hear frequently when this body elects Speaker of the House, what typically happens is the lowest vote getting candidate will then withdraw and sometimes put their support behind another candidate. And then the whole vote is taken over again with people then going on to their next preferred candidate who supported that one that was dropped. So that's essentially what happens, only with ranked choice voting, it happens automatically within the machine. It doesn't, you don't actually have to put the ballots in again or anything like that because the voters have already ranked their preferences. Because of all of this, there's a ton of precedent and data on how well ranked choice voting works. We are not starting from scratch with some experimental system. We have the information to work off of. So you probably already know, but I'll just go through how it does work. Instead of voting for a single candidate, voters are able to rank their preferences, which I think is a very intuitive system. It doesn't require a lot of explanation on a ballot. People know how to rank their preferences on things, whether it's ice cream flavors or beers or whatever. In the first round tabulation, all first preferences of all voters are counted. If the candidate at that point receives 50% of the vote or more, that candidate is declared the winner, just like a normal election. But if no candidate receives 50%, the ballots cast for the lowest vote-getting candidate are then shifted to those voters' next preference, whatever that preference was. It would be different for all the voters. And then the ballots are retabulated, and this round keeps repeating until a candidate receives a majority, until all ballots are exhausted. So it fixes a lot of what currently ails us in our current system. Number one, there is no spoiler effect. The voter is completely free, and I think this is really the best thing about ranked choice voting. The voter is free to vote his or her conscience without worrying that they're throwing their vote away on someone who isn't going to win, or that they're helping Beelzebub win the election. They're really able to vote, I think, the way our founders wanted us to vote, which is for who we truly wanted. And because it gets rid of this lesser of two evils problem, any usually disadvantaged candidate can compete on a level playing field based on ideas and merit only, without voters worrying about throwing away their vote or helping, this feared candidate. Ranked choice voting, I believe, gives the most accurate, granular, high-definition picture of what a voter actually wants, because they're able to give us that very granular data on what they want. It also removes a main driving factor in political polarization, meaning people aren't forced into one of two camps anymore, and they're more open to nuanced discussions on issues leading to more compromise and better policy making. And maybe most importantly, people's votes matter, which means it will decrease voter apathy and increase civic engagement. So no more people going, I'm not going to go to the polls because my vote doesn't count. So I want to talk for a moment how the bill deals with multi-member districts, which, while not unique to New Hampshire, it's certainly something that isn't commonplace. And in ranked choice voting, there are a few different flavors that deal with multi-member districts, and I would call this flavor bland vanilla. I sought out to change the least that I could and make it as simple as possible. So in this bill, for example, in a 3-member district, the top 3 rankings of each ballot would count in the first round, and then as candidates are eliminated, each ballot counts for that voter's top 3 eligible candidates. So if your number 2 choice was eliminated, then your ballot would then count for number 1, number 3, and number 4. I wanted this committee to be willing to discuss this issue, so I did seek out the simplest solution to this. But there are other ranked choice voting methods for dealing with multi-member districts that offer a lot of really interesting benefits. They offer proportionality, so it's not really, you don't have these single party sweeps, but you have the proportion of representatives actually mirroring the proportion of your district. In this system, it also eliminates wasted votes. Not just, we're eliminating wasted votes for candidates who don't win, but in some of these systems in multi-member districts, you're also eliminating wasted votes that are above a threshold for winning for the winning candidate. So further, in our current multi-member district and in many other systems, you have a system where the voter has to kind of be strategic with his or her votes, where voting for additional candidates beyond your most preferred candidate actually hurts your preferred candidate's choice. So in a multi-member district right now, if you have 3 people and you really like one, you might want to vote for 3. That's the democratically right thing to do, but you have to face the fact that any vote you cast for any other candidate other than your most preferred candidate actually hurts your candidate's chances. So I don't think that's a fair burden to put on voters. They should just be able to vote their conscience. And one of the great things about ranked choice voting, especially in multi-member districts in some of these different alternatives, is that it eliminates that problem. That your lower ranked choices never ever hurt your preferred candidate. So there's so much good potential with ranked choice voting, especially in multi-member districts, but we first have to get ranked choice voting in general before we can realize any of those additional benefits. So today I made sure there were a couple of experts here who have both expertise in the math behind ranked choice voting and other alternative voting systems, and the actual logistics and cost of implementing a new voting system, specifically ranked choice voting. So I'll defer to them on most of the technical issues, but I did want to briefly speak on the logistics and costs. It would virtually cost nothing to reformat the ballots, since we have to reprint those every election cycle anyway. My understanding, though I'm not an expert in voting machines, is that this would be a matter entirely of software and reprogramming the software. That is a fairly routine thing. In some situations, especially when you're buying a new machine, is included in the cost of the machine. Further, because the additional rounds are done electronically, not physically, the workers are not actually feeding the ballots in repeatedly into machines. It's all done within the machine. There would not be a significant added cost in doing this. It wouldn't extend worker time. Now, I know switching to a new system of voting is a really big change, and it's going to require a lot of study for us to understand really the nuances of how this or any other system works. And especially, I'm talking to a room that's entirely made up, or almost entirely made up, of either one or two of the main parties, myself included. So all the while, I'm asking you to consider a system that is more fair for independents and third-party people. So I understand that this is an uphill ask here. But there's so much potential for ranked choice voting to increase accurate representation, especially in multi-member districts, that I think it would be a very fair course of action, since this has never been proposed in New Hampshire before, for this committee to amend this bill to be a study bill, under which you could study all possible options, and which, if any, you feel works best for New Hampshire. Certainly the fair and accurate representation of the people of New Hampshire is worth such a study. And I'm confident that if you do study it, that you will find that ranked choice voting is the best method. So with that, and I spoke as quickly as I could, I'm happy to take questions.
Representative Howard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You said there would, I'm reading this in section 2, it states that this would apply to state rep races. And living in a district that has 11 state reps, quickly doing the math, in section on the bold on section 24, for offices by ranked voting, the clerk shall mark as many variations or rankings as are reasonably necessary to demonstrate the accuracy of the device.
I'm sorry, can you tell me where you are?
Line 23, the clerk shall mark as many as possible of the combinations of choices that a voter may indicate of the ballot.
Can you tell me what page?
What page?
51.
Yeah.
Line 23, the clerk shall mark as many as possible of the combinations of choices that a voter may indicate of the ballot. It's been a while since I've been in the math class, but I've taken several. At first glance, I think that in an 11-seat race with only the two major parties, you're talking 11 possible ways, picking 11 out of 22. Running through the combinations, not even ranking them, there's a number of ways you can pick 11 people, I believe is 8,360. It does not account for just picking 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, or even just one. On top of that, if you add 3 more people to the race, there's 3 third-party candidates, that number, and my math is probably way off, doubles. So 16,000 sample ballots is not going to significantly impact. There's about, Scanlon, maybe Deputy Scanlon can back me up. That's about how many ballots we pull in a very busy election. You're talking 16,000 sample ballots is not going to be a time nor cost problem.
No, because that wouldn't happen. I think that fairly falls into the category of impossible, since it says as possible. I think the point is, and just to be clear, the section you're referring to here is about testing the devices, which is a section we already have. And so the point of testing the devices is then to mark several ballots that have different combinations of candidates. Certainly, marking 16,000 different combinations would fall under the impossible category. I think that certainly we can do a fair way of testing those with just several ballots and not 16,000.
Representative Freeman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative Reed. I know you're comfortable here. You've been here now.
You might as well just add me, have a seat.
One question. Now, I'm going to ask this question.
Yes, you are.
Thanks for the help.
I understand. Thank you so much, Representative. I understand what this bill is trying to get at, but isn't that the function of our primaries? Is not the function of our primaries to eliminate candidates so we have a general election? So why would we want to supplant something that we've always used with something that we have not used? And quite frankly, I don't see how this would help the voters. They have a hard enough time just getting into the primaries and the general election. How many elections would this entail?
Oh, this does not add to the number of elections. This is a method of election, and this does not in any way replace primaries. This is, the two serve entirely different functions, and in fact, this would apply to primaries, so this would be the way in which we calculate votes within a primary as well. So what you're talking about with primaries is how we select candidates within a party. This is how we select candidates in the general election, and this is totally presuming that we only have the number of, main party candidates that we have seats. So if we have a 3-member district, you typically would have 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans, and maybe a couple independents. And that would be the same situation here. So this is not saying we'd have 50 Republicans and 50 Democrats running in the same race. That would be determined in the primaries, just as it currently is. This is saying how we allow people to vote so that they can vote for these independent or third-party candidates without being worried that they're throwing their vote away. They can make it their first preference, and then they can then back it up with the second preference that might be one of the main parties.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Representative Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question. I'm more concerned with my town, which is a paper ballot town. Rather than having the machine do everything, as you say, I can see not only would the election be rather confusing, but a recount would drive us nuts. I wondered if you can speak to how the paper ballot system would work any differently than it does currently.
It would work exactly how we've laid it out in this bill. It does take a little bit more time, but it is completely doable by hand, and it's not difficult math. In fact, there's really no math involved. It is, you do the election like we normally would do, the last lowest vote getting candidate, then if there's no winner in that first round, then you would take those ballots, move them to their second preference, and then recount. Usually you get a winner within the first couple of rounds, so it's not like, you'd have a whole lot, but it's possible you could have several rounds. And then at that point, I would say you're paying a few workers, a few more hours once every couple of years to do that, and I would say that fair and accurate representation of the people is worth that added cost.
Thank you.
Further questions from committee members. Representative Gay.
I really would like to see a sample count, because this is kind of blowing me away. So if you have 8 people somebody ranked and there's only 3 winners, you wouldn't take the top 3. You take the bottom 8th and 7th and 6th or
No.
what, and move them.
No, go ahead.
You can feel free to answer, but no, we don't take the bottom. I want to kind of talk about how we got to this solution for multi-member districts, which I think is what you're talking about.
No, I'm not.
Well, you said
where they are.
She's back at the basic math.
Okay.
So let's just leave that there. I'm sure through other testimony, and you can ask other committee members when we discuss this about the basic math of the system that Representative Reed is talking about. Further questions from the committee? Representative Negron.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. I guess I'm at a very fundamental crossroads when I understand about one person, one vote. What I'm hearing now is I got one person, maybe 2 votes, and one person, maybe 3 votes. So I vote first for my guy, and you know what? Elections have consequences. We've heard that before. So my first person that I voted for didn't win. So that was my one vote. So all of a sudden now, my person didn't win, so my ballot gets looked at again, and I look at my second vote, and now my second vote is counted. I guess I don't know fundamentally how I reconcile the fact that my first vote, which was what I casted, is utilized to say, well, he didn't win, so now I get a second bite at the apple to try to find out. Now it's an aggregate, everybody's second choice. I guess it flies in the face of me, for me personally, how I now have 2 and 3 chances to get somebody elected when the very fundamental premise of what our founding fathers said was one person, one vote. So how do I reconcile that in my mind when I go to bed tonight to say, okay, you know what, we're going to change fundamentally how we elect people, because now your first choice doesn't make it, your second choice doesn't make it, and maybe on the third time, on your third selection, because it wasn't my first one, right? Now my third one gets elected. How do I reconcile? Help me understand that.
Well, first of all, I completely agree with one person, one vote, and if the problem that you're mentioning were accurate, then I can tell you 21 states wouldn't have ranked choice voting in some method or another. So in this system, your vote is the entire ballot for that race, right? So you can consider each candidate that you rank then one portion of your complete vote. That is how I would tell you to reconcile it. It's not you're getting a second chance or a third chance. All the voters have an equal ability to rank their preferences, so nobody's getting more chances than another, but you're ranking who you prefer next, and then who you prefer least. So that is part of your total vote.
Further questions, Representative Mayer.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I hope I can figure this out. So you would say, for instance, everybody who gets, when you get a first, you might have 50 points. If you are second, you might have 30 points. And if you're a third, you might have 25 points. So you put the math all together and see who has the most in the end?
I don't even know what you mean by points. Do you mean votes?
No.
I think,
if it's ranked
if I can
value,
just say, I think the basic
value. I don't
concept
understand
is
the concept.
the person who reaches 50.0001% wins. It's over, it's done.
This is a way of getting rid of low plurality winners and getting mostly majority winners. Candidates who have the broadest support possible. As far as the math, I'll very briefly say there's no real math involved. All we're doing, and I want you to think back to like when we elected speaker, somebody who gets the least number of votes then drops out of the race. We vote again with the candidates available to us. That's exactly what's happening with ranked choice voting, only it happens automatically because we've already ranked our preferences.
Thank you. Representative Believe, would you believe that I might have some concerns about this bill? Given that we just heard lots of testimony about concerns on hacking on the electronic process we use on our scanning counting voter devices, and that we are now talking about adding a whole new programming element to the bills. You would, okay.
I would believe it.
And would you believe that I might also have concerns about this process, given that apparently I've had a number of people tell me I have a statistically significant number of people who can't fill out the little oval in a manner that allows the machine to read it. And now you're talking about giving these very same people license to fill out multiple ovals.
Well, they already have multiple ovals, to be fair, and certainly in multi-member districts, they have multiple upon multiple ovals.
Okay.
But yes, I would believe your concerns. I would say, again, that if we believe that the founders' idea of our country was to best represent the voters, this is mathematically the best way to represent the voters.
Thank you. Further questions for Representative Reed, who has done a fine presentation and been a good sport. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, we are going to continue testimony on this bill. I am telling committee members I am going to have to leave in 5 minutes for another meeting. I need to tell you, I think I will be coming back. Because we will still be there, and this committee needs to make a decision at some point, and I'm waiting for my vice chair to come back to take over for when I leave, and she has just arrived. Because we have 13 more speakers signed up on 1540. And so we need to make there.
All right. Good answer.
All right, so, and I also want to be considerate of the fact that there are people who have also come to speak to 1240.
That's okay, Kayla's working.
So I am saying that to committee members and members of the public in regards to your coming forward here. If you have written testimony, I am going to ask that you simply ask us to do our homework and read it, and I need to say that the committee, in my experience, does. And I don't want to shut off your right to speak, but I also understand that we are getting into the hour where people have to leave. And the roads, I understand, are still bad. I'm just saying that. They keep moving the hour they are supposed to get better. And I'm not quite sure, looking out the window, when that's going to be. And there are members of this committee that drives a substantial distance and time to get here. And I want to make sure that they can do so safely. So, I am suggesting that depending on what happens, you know, an option is to continue these hearings to another day, but I would simply ask the committee to take careful consideration of their questions, that they are germane to the witness and the subject to which the witness spoke, and I would ask the witnesses to pay attention to the testimony that might have already been offered, and if there is agreement, to simply let us know. So having said that, I just want everybody to understand where we are. The weather is adding a little bit to my concern about this hearing and people needing to leave and to get home. So with that being said, I'm going to move on to the next pink card for 1540, which is Peter White from Nottingham, who is representing New Hampshire independent voters. And you don't look like Peter White.
Peter White was here, and he got a call from his daughter who was stuck in the snow, and he asked me, he asked me to just give you his written testimony. He just left because of the delay.
Oh, I feel terrible, but thank you for that. So so I'm going to mark his card as written testimony only. Please give him my regrets that we did not get to his oral participation, and I hope his daughter's okay and smart.
Very quickly, there's a pink card for Rick Gordon on behalf of Corinne Dodge, and he also had to leave. So here's the written testimony for Corinne Dodge. So look, we're down to 10 or 11.
No, he did put in a card for her.
Copies.
We'll keep one. All right, William Sir?
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
Manchester.
And I have I don't have enough copies for everyone, but this
You
is
can
very
give it
short.
to us and we will make copies.
We'll make the copies.
But you go ahead, tell us.
So I'm William
Welcome.
Cerf from Manchester, New Hampshire. I have favored ranked choice voting since John Anderson ran for president in 1980 and thereafter started the organization Fair Vote. Political competition created by the two major parties, along with their insulation from new political competition that would better serve the public interest, is the underlying root cause of our electoral problems in New Hampshire and the United States. Notwithstanding the fact that the Libertarian Party in New Hampshire has ballot access through the end of the 2018 cycle, but they will need in 2018 to meet certain voter thresholds, a certain percentage of the vote, in order to have continued ballot access. This is again, an onerous process that the two major parties do not have to go to. I've heard in this room people who have problems and difficulties, but I urge the committee to approve HB 1540 for further consideration. And I encourage members of this committee to study ranked choice voting, look at the website www.fairvote.org, and hope that you will eventually see the wisdom of it. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee members? You don't have to take questions.
No, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for your testimony. And up next we have Rick Yeames of Concord, New Hampshire. Do you have written testimony?
I do not. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. Short and sweet. I just like this bill because it allows my vote to vote my conscience and be for who I want to be, whatever party or wherever they come from, and not have to vote because I'm voting against any other candidate or any other party.
Thank you for your testimony.
And welcome to entertain any questions.
Questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And next we have Mr. Darryl Perry from Lobbyist Lobby. Do you happen to have written testimony today?
Not for this bill. And for the record, Darryl Perry, CEO of Liberty Lobby LLC, officially taking no position on the bill. I'm definitely in favor of modifying the form of election that we have. I do have some concerns about this bill as written. Specifically that it does not state which round of voting is used for the purposes of ballot access. Currently the law for ballot access is that a party that receives 4% of the vote for either governor or U.S. Senate is then granted ballot access. This bill does not specify if we use the initial count or if we use the final count after candidates are eliminated. So it's very possible, depending on which count gets used, that either parties such as the Libertarians either retain or lose ballot access. There are also some concerns because of some of the very sizable districts that we have for multi-member. The ballot, I'm not sure how the ballot would necessarily be laid out, because I know in other places that use ranked choice voting, they have circles that specify 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So for that 11-member district that Representative Hellwig mentioned, are we going to have 11 bubbles next to each candidate's name? I do believe strongly that at the very least this should be turned into a study committee so that you could look at not just ranked choice voting, but also what is used down in Australia called the single transferable vote. Could look strongly at approval voting unless you decide to actually OTP HB 1240. And to answer a question by Representative Damaris where you mentioned about the points for first place gets X number of points, that would be what's called Borda count, to where, again, first place would get a certain number of points, second place gets a different number of points, third place, etc., and then you combine those points. That's called Borda count. Also something that I think if you do turn this into a study committee should be strongly looked at. And again, I understand the concerns for those hand count ballot towns to where it might take a little bit of extra time But I'm not opposed to the bill. I'm just not as strongly in favor as I could be if this bill had some tweaks, and I'll answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
And I just want to point out that Representative Reed did point out to me that page 4, lines 6 through 9 do show that for the purposes of ballot access, it's the initial count, the first round.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. And up next, we have Mr. Alvin C. from Loudon. And do you happen to have written testimony?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Alvin C. I live in Loudon, New Hampshire. And I'll try to be more brief than I was originally planning on being, but I've got mixed emotions on this bill. I think ranked choice voting is much better than what we have now. I'm just not sure that we're ready for ranked choice. My actual preference is for approval voting, which is not on this bill, so I won't go into that. But one of the things that's really needed for this in order to be able to rank the candidates is for the voters to be able to get clear and specific information on all the candidates. And quite often the media sources and other sources that you look for stuff are only going to mention the two major party candidates and none of the third parties, none of the independents or anybody else. And you can't rank them if you can't find out information about them, especially useful information about what they're standing for or things like that. That's the biggest problem with any of the voting systems. Sometimes it's difficult just to get a complete list of the names that are on the ballot, let alone information about them. That said, some more comments on the bill itself. The bill doesn't specify how multi-seat offices will be handled, and it should. In my written testimony, I've given a link to Fair Vote Minnesota, which has that link goes to how it works how they work it on multi-seat elections, which is different from what was testified earlier. I would suggest an actual problem on page 3, line 33. The line should say if there are the same as or more continuing candidates. Right now,
Could you repeat that?
line 33
On page 3?
on page 3. Sorry. Actually, it should have been 34. Line 34. If there are, it's where it says if there are more continuing candidates than the number to be elected plus 2, it really should say if they are the same as or more, because the previous statement on line 32 says that there are fewer continuing candidates, and it says that there's only 2 possible outcomes on line 30 and 32, but there's actually 3. But the solution for 2 of them are the same, so that's why I suggested on line 34 adding in that. And I do apologize, my written testimony has that wrong. Should be line 34. And then the one that concerned me the most was on page 4, line 1, where it states that election officials may resolve prospective ties between candidates before the election. And my question is, how can you do that? I don't know what kind of crystal ball they need to have. So that would need to be explained, because later on in the process of the voting rounds, it says that if there's a tie, there has to be whatever decision is made to resolve that tie has to be saved with the thing so that it can be applied again in a recount if it happens. And as I say, I'm really mixed feelings on this bill, just because of the number of cities and states that have tried ranked choice voting and then actually rejected it, actually repealed it, I think it's a little bit scary. So that's all I have. That takes questions.
Questions for Mr. C? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. And next we have Mr. Justin O'Donnell from Nashua.
I'm back. Thank you, Madam Chair. I did have written testimony. I emailed the committee this morning extensively. My preference with changes to voting systems is towards approval voting, which is a system which we'll discuss later with House Bill 1240. But I do have several fundamental issues I do take with ranked choice voting as a system. Notably, it was mentioned that Robert's Rules of Order calls for ranked choice voting as its preferred method of voting, which is patently false. Robert's Rules of Order does mention ranked choice voting as an option, but it does go on to say that preferential voting affords less freedom of choice than repeated balloting because it denies voters the opportunity of basing their second or lesser choices on the results of earlier ballots, and that because the candidate or proposition in last place is automatically eliminated and may thus be prevented from becoming a compromised choice. So as far as what Robert's Rules of Order has to say on the matter, that was patently against preferential voting or ranked voting of any kind, the way I interpret it. How would I interpret Representative Negrin's question about one man, one vote earlier is another issue I take with ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting fails. It asks every voter to rank and give a preference and an opinion on each candidate in the race, but it fails to consider the opinions of lesser candidates on those whose first place candidate is never eliminated. These people, those voters who don't have their candidates eliminated and move on to the next round of a runoff, never get their vote counted more than just the once. However, the full expression of their opinions on other candidates is expressed for other voters. I do believe that this system does fail the one man, one vote test for that very reason. It's a different reason than how you were explaining it, but I think we come to the same agreement there. Some of the mathematical issues I have with ranked choice voting is that it does fail the test of monotonicity, which is explained in depth in my written testimony in your email, but the simple basis is it is mathematically possible for someone to rank their preferred candidate higher and cause them to lose the election, where they could have won by being ranked lower on an earlier round ballot. It also fails to preserve condescending winners, where if each candidate in the race was matched head-to-head in individual elections, the candidate that wins each head-to-head election could possibly not be elected under ranked choice voting, even though they would have been clearly the consensus pick under systems like approval voting, Buckland voting, score voting, range voting, or a number of other systems. I may be incorrect in this, but I believe Deputy Secretary Scanlon had mentioned last week in the discussion that recounts have to be done by hand, do they not? For a district like Representative Elwood's district in Hillsborough 37, there are currently 3 ballot qualified parties, plus the potential of independent voters who petition onto the ballot. There's a possibility of being 30 to 40 candidates on the ballot in Hillsborough 37. The number of possible permutations of a ballot, allowing for each individual candidate to be ranked between 1 and 40, is a factorial number, and in fact it exceeds the total population of the United States for just the district of Hillsborough 37. It's again mathematically possible for every single voter in that district to have a unique ballot that would have to be tabulated and recorded separately, which would be, harking back to the previous testimony on the bills, I believe that would be an administrative nightmare on the Secretary of State's office. Now, all these problems that I find with ranked choice voting, as much as I do want to see an alternative voting method, first past the post, all the problems with first past the post, I do agree with. I believe approval voting manages all of these issues, but I'll go more into that when we discuss House Bill 1240. As far as my concerns with ranked choice voting, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Questions from committee members? Seeing none,
Thank you, and thank you for coming in front of us again, Mr. O'Donnell. You said you emailed the testimony to the committee. I don't have it in my inbox. Could you resend that? I want to make sure that it's in the permanent.
Absolutely.
The permanent file. I am the clerk. This is what I do.
I got it.
Thank you. Thank you, Scott.
He sends it at 9:53. I see it at 9:53.
Speaking next, in favor of the bill is Miss Charlotte Hove of Brookline.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and committee. Just briefly, I'd like to vote for my best choice and not my perception of who I think might be likely to have a possibility of winning that I could get along with. And also, I'm happy that New Hampshire is ranked 3rd in 2016 in terms of percentage of eligible voters who actually voted. But I think there are people who just stay home because they don't think that the person that they'd like to vote for has a chance, so why bother? So wouldn't it be nice if we got not just better than 70%, but better than 90%? That's all I have to say. Thank you.
And up next, we have Miss Heather Stockwell of Dublin speaking in support of the bill. Do you happen to have written testimony?
I do not.
No worries.
I'd like to start by just saying that I'm a resident of New Hampshire for 50 years, and so I feel like my testimony offers some perspective over time. My father also used to be a state rep for 16 of those years, up until 2002, so if you were here before them, Representative Avery from Dublin, although it was a different district, was one of your colleagues. So I have great respect for the process and what you're all doing here today. And I did also drive over an hour to get here. Actually, a friend drove over an hour to get here, and I thank him. I support this bill. Partly, I'm going to talk again about my father. We did not always agree on our political values growing up, which led to some very interesting dinner time discussions. One thing we did agree on was about campaign finance reform, and as many of you may know, Granny Dee Haddock is from Dublin, and she was a friend and a colleague of ours, and I continue to do the work after her death in 2010. So my point is, one of the reasons, the main reasons that I prefer this method of voting as opposed to even approval voting, and I can get into that more in a minute, is basically because I feel that this is a way for us to level the playing field, so to speak, so that small-time candidates that don't have a lot of money or the ability or rubbing elbows with the rich and wealthy can actually get into politics and represent the people, the actual people, better. So that's really the gist of what I want to talk about. And somebody did talk a little bit about the fact that Libertarians are now a recognized party, so we do not have a two-party system in New Hampshire now. We have the largest undeclared voting bloc of any state, as far as I know. Over 40% or around 40% are undeclared. And that says something to us. That says to me that we have a political spectrum that is not being represented with the two-party system that we have all come to know, and some of us love or hate. And being a visual person, I feel that that spectrum is not illustrated well. So I feel like this would represent us. I feel that approval voting, while I understand what that means, but I don't think it solves the problem of not voting for the lesser of two evils. So for instance, if you were a member of the Green Party or the Libertarian Party and you felt that everyone else did not represent you and you only approve of the Libertarian candidate, then that's it, and you've wasted your vote just the same as we have now. So my feeling is that people that have been against ranked choice voting don't understand it. And even in my own community, I'm a founding member of an activism group in my region, and there are 50 people at our meetings generally, and we have tried this out in non-political ways, ice cream and beer. Just to give an example, in a sort of emotional way, actually someone that's going to speak here today led us in one of those votes, and we have voted as the leadership team of that group to use that as when we elect new members to our leadership, because we feel that it's a fair way of getting the best person for the job, or the best person that represents the totality of our group. I do understand some of the issues that people have with the one person, one vote. I feel that I respect it. I honestly, I understand it, but I do also agree that when you're voting, only one vote actually counts. There's only one vote that's counted. You're not actually voting a number of times. And also to speak to if 40 people are running in an 11-person district, you're not going to vote for 40 people. You're not going to rank 40 people. You're only going to rank the number of positions that are open. So I just want to make sure that we're clear about that. I do know that there's some confusion. I urge everyone on this committee to really do the research and even try it amongst yourselves using ice cream or something, or your favorite sandwich shop in town, to really get to know it and understand it, because it is what helped me get to where I am today on this issue. I'd be happy to take questions, but that's all I have to say.
Questions from committee members? Representative Gann.
I would suggest that in the future, when people bring a concept like this that's new, that they actually do an example of what it is. Because I have no idea, when you do your second tier, if nobody wins the first tier, when you go to the second tier, does that mean everybody's second choice gets compared? Or
No.
the people who win in first, you just add some?
So in the situation where we voted on our favorite ice cream as a group, I believe it was chocolate, vanilla, mint chocolate chip, and maple walnut were the 4 choices that we put on the wall. So,
how quickly did maple walnut get them?
I will bear. I'm sorry to tell you, that was the first one to go. So what happened is, and actually I'm just trying to recall this the best I can because we don't have a videotape of this. This is my memory of this is that maple walnut was first to go. So what happened was maple walnut received only 3 points, say, or 3 votes. And then, so those 3 people that voted for maple walnut, we went to their second vote. Maple walnut's wiped off the slate. No more maple walnut available. Okay? So then those 3 people that voted for maple walnut now have their second choice. So some of them might have gone to mint chocolate chip or vanilla or, right? So then they tally those votes. If we still don't have 50% of the vote, then the next lowest gets wiped out, and then you add those counts to the 2 remaining. I'll be honest, chocolate won! I mean, I didn't think vanilla was going to win, but we gave him a chance. Does that answer your question better?
It sounds like whoever comes in first stays there.
Yeah, anybody
at the bottom, you let them vote. Now, and you add to what's there.
Unless that #1 vote has over 50% of the vote. If you already have over 50% of the vote, you're done. You're done. You don't do any more counting.
Thank you.
Any other questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Great.
And next we have Tiani Coleman. Did I get that right? Awesome. Who is with New Hampshire Independent Voters. And would you be willing to pass out your testimony?
Yes, it's actually an op-ed I wrote, so it's not my testimony, but I emailed them to you, but I'm not sure directly. I'm Tiani Coleman, and I'm a resident of Amherst, New Hampshire, and I come before you today as a voter and also as president of New Hampshire Independent Voters, and also as someone who was chair of the Salt Lake County Republican Party back in the early 2000s before I became an independent. And we used ranked choice voting in our state conventions. So as a voter, I think it's a great opportunity to be able to vote vote our conscience without it affecting, without it electing the person who we really don't want. As an independent, as has been mentioned, we have somewhere between 39% and 44% of the voters here in New Hampshire who have chosen not to affiliate or identify with a particular party, which means that they aren't really entirely satisfied with the two choices of the two major parties. And this is a way that lets us better express our votes as we go vote in the primaries and in the general election, if we really want to be able to vote for our conscience, but still might have a preference between the two major parties. It allows us to do that. It allows also candidates to have a better chance. So what might bring better candidates to start running for office who are not part of the two major parties, or even part of the two major parties, who might sometimes get sidelined because they aren't partisan enough, they're not screaming the partisan rhetoric enough. When you're more independent-minded, you might be more willing to run for office in this kind of system because you know that you're going to have a better shake in a system that's not quite so partisan. As a past chair of the Salt Lake County Republican Party, we use this many times in our conventions, as well as some of our central committees, as well as our caucuses. In the 2004 election, for example, when Governor John Huntsman was elected governor, many of you may know him, he was, that was a race of 12 gubernatorial candidates in our convention, and he came out ahead in that convention, and all of the 12 candidates who came from various factions within the party were all happy and rallied around this method of voting. They all felt like it was fair. It did not help or hinder either candidate, gave them all a very fair shake. For those who don't understand appropriately, what's happening is, let's use Robert's Rules of Order, for example. It was mentioned that Robert's Rules of Order prefers this method, and then someone gave testimony saying that it doesn't actually prefer this method. What Robert's Rules of Order prefers is multi-round balloting. We used a lot of Robert's Rules of Order in our Republican committee, so I'm very familiar with it. And it prefers multi-round voting. But obviously in an election, we're not going to hold multiple rounds of voting. We can't hold multiple elections, right? We just want to hold one primary election and one general election. So we can't use multi-round balloting. The very next best thing to that is ranked choice voting, because it's like a multi-round ballot, but it's all done on one ballot. And so when you're worried that some people's votes will be counted more than once, that's not what's really happening. What's really happening is that everyone is voting again in a second ballot, so to speak. It's not just some people. Everyone's voting again. It's just that you're assuming that the people whose first choice candidate is still in the race, you're assuming that's still their first choice. And so their first choice is getting counted the second time. But the people whose candidate has been eliminated, they can't vote for that candidate anymore. They've been eliminated. So you're assuming that they're going to go to their second choice, and that's the one you count for them. Everyone else, you're counting their first choice. So everyone's getting an equal vote in every round. Everyone's getting to vote in every round. No one's getting more votes than anyone else. And it's only one vote per candidate in each round. Finally, it's mentioned in my, it was mentioned here also that people can win by ranking their candidate lower. This is absolutely false. In ranked choice voting, you will never penalize your first choice candidate. You can always rank exactly how you feel. If you like someone absolutely first, you rank them first. You rank someone else second, third. You don't have to worry about strategic voting at all, because you can know that your highest choice candidate, as long as they're in the race, will always be counted. And so you're never going to hurt your first candidate by voting for them first, and you're never going to penalize them by ranking further down the list, because your highest ranking is always the ranking that's going to be counted. As far as the mention that someone said that in this bill, ties are counted before the election, that's referring to in a recount, so it's something entirely different. But finally, I just wanted to point out, it's in my op-ed, but I did want to point out that it's a very timely time for New Hampshire to be considering ranked choice voting. In the 2016 election, we noticed that in every single top race here in New Hampshire, president, governor, U.S. representative of both 1st District and 2nd District, and Senate, all 5 of those races had enough third-party votes or independent and third-party votes for independent candidates or third-party candidates that it exceeded the vote margin between the 2 top parties. And so that means that in all of those races, none of the candidates got more than 50% of the vote. None of the winners got more than 50% of the vote. We had very close elections, which means that those third parties could have served as spoilers in some cases. And by doing this ranking, we can know that the person who won is really the person who has the broadest base support by the voters. It helps the people who are voting to be able to vote their conscience if they want to vote for a third party or an independent, but it also helps the people in the 2 major parties by not letting these other voters shift off their votes and serve as a spoiler. And so it really helps everybody. It's a win-win for everybody. I would point out that it's not a partisan issue. It's supported by John McCain, Barack Obama, Gary Johnson, Jill Stein, Bernie Sanders, Larry Lessig. I mean, the list goes on. It's supported in Utah, the Utah State House, because they're so familiar with how it works in the Republican Party. They had a Democrat sponsor the bill, but the Republicans who dominate the House, they have like a 3/4 majority. The Republicans have a very big majority there. They voted in their House in favor of ranked choice voting, 59-12. So this is something that's supported by both parties, by all parties, third parties, independents, because it really is the fairest way to do elections for everyone. It works out. So if you study it carefully and really look at it carefully, I think you come to see that it is a very efficient, fair, easy to understand method of voting.
Thank you for your testimony. Do we have questions from committee members? Representative Howard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the last things you said was this is the way that everybody gets a choice that they're happy with. Mathematically speaking, what happens when everybody's second choice is nobody's first choice? The person that actually everybody would have been okay with, not overjoyed because it wasn't their first choice, gets mathematically eliminated in the first round when they actually would have won if you went to 2 rounds. Somebody's shaking their head no in the fact that it's not possible. It's entirely possible. Let's say if everybody, you did ranked choice voting in, say, the last presidential election, and everybody, most people voted for either one of the 2 primary candidates, and everybody's second choice was Gary Johnson, or everybody else's second choice. You would have eliminated Gary Johnson in the first round, and you would just be adding on a few other hanger-on votes to still be potentially still less than 50%. This doesn't fix that problem. This just makes everybody's vote be.
Let me explain. I think there might be some people that can speak to that a little better than I can. They might be a little more of an expert, but as far as I understand it, this would only work if everybody had the same first choice. If everyone had the same first choice and then they also had the same second choice, then it's true their second choice isn't going to get much headway. But if everybody has the same second choice and they have different first choices, then some of those first choices are bound to get eliminated. You're saying if nobody votes for the second choice as first choice. Okay, so I guess if nobody votes for the second choice as first choice, it's true they could possibly get eliminated. And I would say this, that might be one reason why some people like approval voting. I personally support ranked choice voting more than approval voting because approval voting, in my opinion, and it has some good things, but the reason why I support ranked choice voting more is because it allows people to actually say who they want the most. Instead of choosing the person that everyone kind of feels about, it chooses the person that most people really want. In approval voting, there is no way to actually rank who you like better than the other person. You just have to vote for the people you approve of, which means that there's no way to say, okay, I approve of these 4 people, but I love this one the most. You can't say in any way, you cannot say that you like this one the most, and so you can't actually vote for who you like the best. Not to mention that in approval voting, if you vote for,
we're going to move on to we have a few more questions.
That's fine.
Thank you for your question, Representative Hellwig. I believe we have a question from Representative Whitehead.
It's similar. I'm getting the impression that this would work best if you didn't have primary. You just had one election and everybody voted their choice. Why do you need primaries? Why would you need primaries if you have ranked choice voting?
Well, you can do it either way. There are a lot of people that advocate just doing ranked choice voting without primaries. It is cheaper. I personally prefer to have both because I think it's good to have an election where there are fewer candidates so that people can really focus in on those, and so you have a preliminary round and a final round. If you just have one big election with a lot of candidates, it's harder to really focus on those few candidates. So in that sense, I think it's good to have both. But you could do it either way.
Thank you. Representative Furman, do you have a question?
I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for coming in front of us. So if I know who I want to choose for a candidate, and I don't want to do ranked choice, I know exactly who I want to vote for. Where does that leave my candidate?
Your candidate will be counted as first in all rounds until they get eliminated. If they don't, then they won't be counted anymore. And like I said, it never hurts you to rank after that. So if you care about something happening, if you know your candidate could get eliminated and you care what happens after that, it never hurts you to rank further down. But if
I
you
know,
don't,
I've
if you
done
don't
my
want
research.
to,
I know who I want to endorse.
then you can just vote for one, and that's fine.
Thank you.
Representative Freeman, thank you, Ms. Coleman, for your testimony. Any other questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you for joining us today. We do have 3 more speakers, so I just ask that everyone is cognizant of time because we're going to have a 5-minute break after we're done hearing this bill, and then we're going to hear the next bill. So if I could please have Grace Ramsey from Fair Vote testifying in support of the bill.
Hello, thank you. So I largely just wanted to answer some of the questions that came up in the course of the conversation today. I work at Fair Vote as the Deputy Director of Outreach, but my specialty is in voter education and engagement in communities that are implementing ranked choice voting. Someone mentioned Fair Vote Minnesota before. That's where I began my work on this in 2013, where they used ranked choice voting citywide. St. Paul, Minnesota also uses ranked choice voting and conducts hand counts with it citywide. So a couple things that I heard. One thing was a question about one person, one vote. That has been upheld by the Minnesota Supreme Court and I believe the 9th District Court as well. So because your vote stays with one candidate at a time, it upholds the principle of one person, one vote in that sense. So it has been tested in the courts and has been upheld every time. One other, I think an example of how this works would be really beneficial for that, so we can make sure to send over materials for how you could possibly hold a hand count so you all could see yourselves, or videos. There are plenty online that can show you how this count works, but that is definitely helpful. In the course of our voter education work, we have found that when voters see a ballot, they largely understand that. That tends to be the moment where they understand this. And in our work in Maine, when this was passed in 2016, we found that when voters responded that they understood, we did survey questions at the end of every conversation, and voters who said that they understood ranked choice voting at the end of the conversation were 70% supported. So as we were saying before, sometimes it just takes getting comfortable with the concept itself, and then people largely support it. In addition to that, I would support a study committee on this bill. I think there's a couple points of contention that I think, as it stands, we need to have more dialogue about, especially multi-member districts. I think there are ways that those things can be addressed. But I would say largely looking at alternative systems would be better than the current block system voting now. In addition to that, there are communities, I know I briefly talked about hand counts, but there are several communities that do hand counts on a large scale with this. Also, that was a discussion when this was passed in Maine, because there are several hand count communities there. So there are best practices in place that have been recommended for communities doing that, both in counting smaller elections and statewide elections. So there are procedures that can be looked at and used. In addition to that, in terms of voters engaging with this, we were talking about ballot errors before. In a poll conducted in the Bay Area where 4 cities use ranked choice voting, 89% of voters responded that they found it easy to use, and 99% of voters cast a valid ballot. and that's pretty consistent in cities and communities using this across the country. So voters who are engaging it, voter education is always necessary with changes and just regularly. I think it's always good to remind people how their elections work. But when voters use this, they do understand it pretty intuitively, even if they haven't been talked to by someone from their jurisdiction. And largely, to talk about primaries, that was one topic that we had. There are several cities that have eliminated primaries. Largely, they looked at alternative solutions because of extremely low turnout in primaries, and seeing that in plurality outcomes in a primary election, often very extreme candidates can win by mobilizing a very small base in a primary and then move on to a general election. And largely, communities that have eliminated them were looking at that effect when they changed their elections. So Minneapolis eliminated a primary because they were seeing extremely low turnouts. The Democratic Party of Virginia has started to use ranked choice voting in internal elections because they were seeing really split outcomes and it was causing a lot of fracturization. So this is a solution that's been used in answer to a lot of different problems, but especially in primaries. States like Nebraska, Utah have wanted to use this almost exclusively in primaries to ensure that candidates who are coming out of them are upheld by the majority of the party if it's a partisan primary. So that's largely the questions that I wanted to answer, but I'm completely open to answering questions.
Thank you. Representative Helwig.
Madam Chair. You said 70% of the people that, as an exit poll when you guys do training, that leave, 70% of people that understand approval voting when they leave your training like it, which leads me to believe that 30% don't like it. But what portion of people that leave your training actually understand it? I mean, if 10% of people that go to training understand it, and 90% don't, and all 90% don't understand it and don't like it, what are the other numbers? How many people leave saying they don't understand it or don't like it total?
Let me clarify that. I'm sorry, I may have been unclear. This was in our campaign in Maine, and this is when we would be knocking on doors or calling voters. So these weren't trainings. These were just conversations. So maybe a minute and a half long. So we would ask at the beginning if someone was familiar with ranked choice voting. If they said yes, we would kind of go through the motions and make sure that they really did understand and any confusion was clarified. But also in those conversations where people did not understand, walking them through the motions of what it means, showing them a sample ballot, and making sure that they left with that understanding. In those conversations where voters weren't familiar, or when they were, when somebody left that conversation saying, yes, I understand ranked choice voting, we found 70% of them also said that they supported it as a policy. So it wasn't in exit polling, it was in our campaign data. So that's what we were seeing across the state. Sorry, that may have been confusing.
Any other questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you for doing
Another thing I'd like to highlight, I'm so sorry I forgot this. There is an organization called the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center, which is a collection of former election administrators, so people who have ran ranked choice voting elections, who have developed research analysis and best practices for how to run these elections. So I think a lot of the questions about how, what machines are capable of, how hand counts can work, they've done a lot of the work in terms of devising ways that you can do these things.
Thank you. And I would just, a quick reminder for those here who are lobbying on behalf of organizations, if you could wear an orange tag next time you're joining us, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
That would be legal. Thank you. And up next we have Mr. Howard Fain of Worcester, Massachusetts, who is Representative Reed's issue expert, according to Greenberg.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, committee. My name is Howard Fain from Worcester, Massachusetts, where I currently teach public school. I've been invited here by Representative Reed as an issue expert. In 1992, I co-founded Fair Vote, the National Electoral System Research and Reform Organization. For over 30 years, I've been studying the effects of RCV on results from actual elections, especially in multi-member districts. And with that, I will dispense with what I've prepared because there's a lot of stuff to address, and I'd also be willing to take some questions. And first, apologize for Representative Helwig. Is it? Yes, for the reaction. I was just processing some things there. So, a couple of things, and I would like to say one of the most important things I think was presented before the committee was by Representative Reed saying, let's study this, okay? I think that's a great plan. I think with the questions and the issues that have raised here, that's what's important here. This should be fully understood, fully resolved. You heard some disputes about what I consider some minor points. But ranked choice voting deserves that attention and that study, and I think that would be very effective. And I'll be talking to some of these issues of systems and so forth. If I can, almost a point of personal privilege, when Mr. Cerf, I believe, was mentioning John Anderson as part of his inspiration, I'd like to share a little something. I wasn't planning on doing this. When I was testifying before an electoral reform commission in 1990 in Washington, D.C., Mr. Anderson was serving on it. His campaign had been in 1980. If you remember, he was a 20-year congressional representative from Illinois, Republican, ran in the primaries for that year. When the Reagan juggernaut took off, he dropped out, ran as an independent candidate. When we talk about spoiler effects here, Mr. Anderson was at 24% in the polls in June of 1980. He finished at 8%. His positions didn't change. His real support didn't change. What changed, or what became known, was the spoiler effect. People were being bombarded. If you vote for John Anderson, you're going to elect Carter. Oh, wait a second. Someone else would tell him, if you vote for Mr. Anderson, you're going to elect Reagan. And the spoiler effect is not abstract. We see it, it's played out. So the issue is not when elections just get spoiled, when the margin of difference between, the total of the independent and third-party candidates are added together, and it's more than the margin separating first and second place. Well, that's an actual realization that it's a spoiler effect. But the spoiler effect is limiting the right of voters to vote comfortably, vote democratically, vote freely for who they want. And I actually had the first conversation about these matters with Mr. Anderson, who saw me after my testimony. And to paraphrase his words, which I just, in remembrance when he died about a month ago, I was posting, that he had been born in this country, lived his whole life in this country, voted his whole life in this country, served in office in Congress in this country, and he had never heard that there were other ways. And I just think this is instructive to remind us, and yes, he did go on to become the chair of Fair Vote for many years into his late 80s, possibly early 90s. That's instructive. It's different, but it's not. It's just saying, let's count our votes. There was a reference to, why do we have this system from Representative Reed? Yeah, took it from old Britain, our colonial ruler. There were no other models at that time. Nowhere to look for representative democracy. But that beta version was improved upon when the rest of the world started buying into this representative democracy idea. Let's have representative legislatures and elected head of state. And they improved it. And so that's why the type of first past the post that Britain has stuck with since that 235-year time period when New Hampshire and the United States got going on that model, the rest of the world has said, let's do something better. Let's do something different. We don't have to go along with what was just there first. And maybe that's been a struggle in the United States and in states like New Hampshire. But it's time to catch up. And the words of John Anderson, when he said, there's other ways, okay, is helping to bring us to that point. Now, a couple of things. I was intrigued when Heather, I'm not sure the last name, referenced that with libertarians having ballot status, it's no longer a two-party system. I don't think that's quite accurate. It's still a two-party system in which a third party is trying to survive. And I have some information notes, and I don't have enough copies, so if I can discuss with you on that. Yes, okay. And you'll see some of these statistics, and I'm veering off a bit, but I have a lot of statistics on some of the flow of elections here. It's a two-party system when the third party or independent candidates can't really function. They run, they get low numbers, they get discouraged, you're blamed for spoilers. That's what keeps it a two-party system. So two-party, that will be liberated to the extent we're going to be able to hear from people when we have structural ways in which those other parties or independent candidates. When Ms. Coleman's talking, I don't want to just say third parties here, a word I don't like to use actually. My testimony will read alternative parties. Third party has a whole element to it. When Ms. Coleman was talking about, and the independent voters needing to step forward and how many there are in New Hampshire, The idea is the system accessible and are people being heard from? So spoiler effect is not just when it occurs, but when it's discouraging.
Mr. Fane,
Yes.
would you be able to speak a little bit more to the technicalities
Yes,
of the bill?
I absolutely can. Let me just, yes, I'll respond to some questions coming up on that came up and do that. In response, Representative Freeman, there's no, and I like to point this out quite frequently, you have no obligation to rank beyond your first choice. And I like to say that because I think people, that's part of the privilege, okay, is to say, I want this person or no one. That's equivalent if there was a runoff election saying, I'm not going to show up, I'm not satisfied, my person didn't make it. It's the same privilege, okay? So there's no obligation. I want to say about weighted votes. As a kid, I always paid attention to the most valuable player. That's how they use that board account that was referenced. And no, that's not this. It's a better system. And it doesn't, if I'm trying to remember some questions, it's not a matter of confirming the the first choice winner, the leader after first choice is. First of all, if the leader after first choice is clearing over 50%, the election's over right off the bat. What I like to say is that there's two avenues if no one has that threshold. And one is to then confirm through the elimination from the bottom candidates and pass on second and third choices that that leader was in fact the right, most broad-based support, the one with the most broad-based support. But there's the other feature that maybe it was vote splitting, maybe there was a group of voters with common interests, same party interests, same general interest of political perspective, and that's what the split vote under the current first past the post would say, sorry, you lost out. We know 65% of voters were in this camp, in this place, but it was 40 to 38 to, to 36. You split your vote, all right? So yes, by looking at those preferences, if no one has cleared that threshold for majority, you get two choices. You can confirm, you can give the mandate to the person who ends up proving they have majority support, or you can advance a candidate who was a victim of that split vote, victim of the spoilers. Both are possible. It's all in the hands of the voters. And the question of Robert's rules really intrigued me, and about the bill, because when applied to the races like the governor and senator, this ranked choice voting for a while has been known as instant runoff. The idea that you might as well hold a runoff. Instead of holding a runoff with a low turnout, less high profile, to find out who's got the broad-based support, you might as well hold it all at once, instantly. And that's what's really good about it. But of course it's impractical. That's what's wrong with runoffs. And this is what the bill will say, it will be all in one package, all in one ballot, apart from the primary, Representative Moynihan, which is, I think Ms. Coleman said, just a debatable point of what's best. The bill as presented includes primaries. It's obviously a consideration that you don't need to have them, and you could even be more efficient in holding them together. So that whole issue of there's another bill before you on approval, you've heard some things said. I don't agree with a lot of things said, but about ranked choice voting, here's the thing. We don't want to be just getting into the weeds on voting math. I'm not an electoral math geek. I know enough. It's intense, and people like to debate fine points. You've heard explanations about why ranked choice voting works. I am from Massachusetts, which I appreciate the invite from Representative Reed to come join you today, but I am involved in an organization there, Voter Choice Massachusetts. And I pulled something off the website which I'd like to share. It's our FAQ on other systems, and I would just like to hear...
You could share that with our clerk.
Yes, exactly. I would like you to just be able to circulate this and hear where we come from without getting into my bill's better than your bill type thing, and where we urge you to see the limitations of first past the post, as it's called, and to be able to consider if these are the flaws, yeah, let's start remedying them. And it's never too late to recognize that these are the flaws. And there was a couple of the, ballot access.
Would you just mind if we could actually have committee members ask questions? Because
Absolutely.
I think there are
It's
a few questions
high time for that,
brewing,
yes.
It might be good to
That'd be
just
great.
narrow in on those.
Thank you.
Questions from committee
If you
members?
don't mind, I forgot to take my jacket.
Representative Freeman. You have a question?
I do, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for coming in front of us.
Yes.
I have two questions, actually.
Yeah.
First off, is Massachusetts entertaining the idea of doing this?
Yes, there are bills testified actually before the Massachusetts legislature, and they have a bill that is before them to implement ranked choice voting for primaries and all state and federal elections. And there's another bill, a local option bill, is to allow communities to, without opening up their full charter, to implement ranked choice voting on their current charter
So the answer,
structure.
the overall answer is yes.
Absolutely,
Massachusetts has
yes.
some bills in their legislature
Yes.
as well.
And the follow-up question.
And the follow-up question is, my concern about this bill, especially, and I've listened to a lot of people say they've done studies on this, they've asked voters about this. My concern is for low-income voters who we have a hard enough time getting to the polls to begin with. Has anyone done a study on how they would feel about a ballot that looks like that? Would they feel intimidated by it? Would they feel disenfranchised? I'm very concerned about that. I live in a ward that replicates that low socioeconomic, and we have a hard enough time just getting people to the polls because they don't feel they're smart enough. How would this affect them?
There's lots of information compiled, and especially in the Bay Area, there's been lots of studies of voter access candidates running
The Bay Area in Boston.
I'm sorry, Bay Area, California.
Thank you.
Yes, okay. Massachusetts Bay, of course. Sorry. There's lots of information, lots of research we can provide you on voter interest.
But any studies in this region?
In this region? I actually, when someone said it was repealed in some places, I live in the city of Worcester, Massachusetts, and 49 to 59 it was used, and it was, I could discuss why it's no longer used. I've studied every one of those elections and the high turnout and the diversity that resulted in that. That's old news, but
So it sounds to me, no, there hasn't been a study.
I don't know of anything in this
along
region of
lines.
where it's implemented that studies that specifically.
Thank you, Mr. Fain, and thank you for your question, Representative Freeman. Do we have any other questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And yes.
We have
I
one
love that.
final speaker, which is Deputy Secretary of State, who will be giving us information.
As he always does.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm David Scanlon, Deputy Secretary of State. I just wanted to mention a couple of things. First, our state constitution only requires a candidate be a plurality of the vote to get elected. So where you have a voting system that now requires a majority, that may be problematic. And I will get the copy of that constitutional reference from the committee. Of course, we don't have it with me at the moment. The second thing is that there is a fiscal note that's attached to this bill. The costs that are mentioned are indeterminable, only because we haven't wrapped our head around how this thing might actually work. I think based on what I heard today, I want to revisit the fiscal note in the bill. I certainly think we need to account for things like how the voters are going to react, poll workers, something new that seems to be kind of complex. It's going to take quite a bit of additional training. We do share the concerns about how recounts might be conducted in this process because New Hampshire is required to do them by hand. And when we get into large representative districts, especially like Salem and Merrimack, Derry, Bedford, towns that we recount regularly anyway and are heavily involved or are just going to become more involved. But that's all I have, Madam Chair. I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Questions from committee members?
Thank you.
Yes. I'm going to leave this up to the committee. Actually, if we could pass the blue sheet up first. But we have one more bill to be heard today. That's the 1240. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people so far signed up to testify. Would everyone be okay with a 5-minute break just to use the bathroom, get a drink of water or snack?
We'd like to invite you to visit freekeen.com. Freekeen.com features audio, video, and blogs chronicling the transition to a voluntary society. Freekeen.com also has comments and discussion forums so you can be heard. Freekeen.com.
I should be in Keene, New Hampshire with the Free Staters.